Taking off from what you said about raising the struggle of the rural poor to another level of degree of consciousness, what I would want to ask is, while they have organized guerrilla zones, there still seems to be a persistence of the traditional idea of individual annihilation of the class enemy in the Maoist practice. This violence doesn't seem to be organizing itself, moving towards a mass insurrectionary kind of a violence. As you have pointed out, that there is a thing of unfolding of the strategy in its implementation. But now that this, what you call the counterinsurgency measure of the state, has been activated, what exactly do the Maoists need to do in order to take this into account, so that this unfolding of the strategy, the internal logic of its strategy, where you move on from guerrilla violence, you move on from individual annihilation to a kind of guerrilla war, a kind of protracted guerrilla war that acquires the shape of a dispersed mass insurrectionary violence. How do you see that can happen?
See, I don't agree with you that the Maoists are following annihilation of class enemies. That took place in the first phase of the Naxalite movement, and that was under the leadership of Charu Mazumdar. In fact, very soon, after the formation of the CPI-ML, if you recall, actually, there was a great degree of divisions within the movement. In fact, a lot of sections within the movement didn't at all agree with that strategy of annihilation of class enemies. It was a wrong strategy, in my view too. And there were divisions in the CPI-ML split into several factions, and the main reason for this was this actually division over, there was a disagreement over the strategy and tactics of Charu Mazumdar. And in fact, there's been some learning from this. The movement has actually learned from this, and after that this strategy has not been followed. In fact, this first phase of the movement really ended with the declaration of the emergency, the crackdown during the emergency. After the emergency, actually, what emerged is the second phase of the Maoist movement, where essentially there were two wings of this movement. Lots of divisions, but essentially I would put it in terms of that there were two wings. One of which is represented by the CPI-ML People's War Group, and the other by the CPI-ML Liberation. Liberation evolved over time quite a bit, but it's not true that the CPI-ML People's War Group went back to the old strategy. That is simply not correct. In fact, if you recall, during the 80s, if you take the movement in Karimnagar and so on, in the 80s, in fact, under the Raitu Kuli Sangham and a whole lot of other mass organizations, in the cultural field there was Virasam, and so on and so forth, students, youth, and all that. There was a series of mass movements, actually, open legal mass movements by the mass organizations of the People's War Group. But the state didn't allow that to happen. In a way, actually, one might say is that they were pushed to this strategy of going back to trying to build up guerrilla warfare and the establishment of guerrilla zones and so on. All this happens in a way, you have a strategy, you had a strategy in the 80s of open legal mass movements and so on. Of course, I must say that those open legal mass movements were always backed by the armed squads. And it's necessary in a country like India, where actually there's a close nexus between economic and political power. You need armed, squads to back open legal mass movements. So that was happening, but I think that was not allowed to happen. But Raitu Kuli Sangham was not allowed its open legal mass movements. One can recall actually really mass rallies of Raitu Kuli Sangham in various cities actually in Andhra Pradesh. So it was that thing, and that was not allowed by the state. So one has to actually look at this in a historical perspective and look at it in terms of what the movement itself has been learning from its past, its mistakes as well as its successes, and how it has been evolving. I think that part of annihilation of class enemies, no Naxal group today in this country follows that. They have learned from these past mistakes, and they have moved on.